have records dating back kind of millions and millions of years, which showed that they actually created the first humans in a laboratory, and so the eye was actually designed by them. That would be.
So where did the aliens come from in that case? Because you can't give an answer in terms of a miracle. If you give an answer in terms of miracle, you're not doing science, you're doing theology.
Yeah, but like you asked, come up with an explanation that would disprove that the human eye came about by natural
but
selection.
and this is where the caveat comes in. If what you're saying is true, which is what Richard Dawkins basically says, is that, and also Francis Crick, that life may have been seeded on Earth from advanced civilization. And when they were pressed about where the advanced civilization came from, they said via natural Darwinian means. So regardless of even if they designed it in a lab, they themselves came via Darwinian means, meaning overall it's still Darwinism and Darwinism's true.
Okay, if you want to consider like indirect Darwinism as in that way.
Well, okay, I'm not making up words. This is what they say. This is why, according to them, Darwinism is absolute. It's just there. It's just all prevailing. Even if there was aliens, they came via Darwinism.
What you need to do.
Do you see why Karl Popper had a problem with Darwinism now?
I'd say that maybe he had a problem with it entirely, or maybe he had a problem with like
he considered it to be a religion.
Well,
and he was an atheist.
Well, I think there's certain thinking that you can do that can be good thinking or bad thinking when it comes to evolution. Like last time we talked about kind of evolutionary theory predicting whether men would abuse their adopted or step sons.
Social Darwinism.
More than their biological daughters.
Which is what Darwinism predicts.
Yeah, they predicted it, then they tested that hypothesis, and they found that, the rate of abuse was 100 times greater for non-blood children.
Right.
And so that's an example.
But you and me, we both know of examples of people that take care of people that they're not related to more than people that they're related to.
Yeah.
Right?
And so that would be
and what Darwinists do is, rather than take that as an example and say Darwinism is false, they come up with an ad hoc explanation. They say it's an evolutionary byproduct.
They'd say that like, well, the general trend of the overall population is as evolution would predict, and there is variation within it.
No, but you have to understand. If I say general relativity works everywhere, and it works on the Andromeda Galaxy, it works on Mars, it works on Pluto, but it doesn't work on a Sunday in Speaker's Corner in 2017 in May, you'd say, what's wrong with you? How are you making an exception? So when it comes to Darwinism, you can't say, well, it's generally correct in these things. It has to be correct overall. And the problem is, when it's shown to be not correct, there's always an ad hoc explanation, which is why people like David Stove, who's another philosopher, atheist philosopher of science, he says, rather than blaming the theory, Darwinists blame the fact. They blame the observations.
No, because the reason why I don't think...
Do you not find it strange that Darwinism is the only theory in the history of science which has been critiqued by philosophers of science who are atheists as a religion? No other theory in science. Doesn't it go to show you that there's something going on, that this is more than just science?
Yeah, I'd say that there can be pitfalls with it, and there can be bad science that you can do with it. But on the example particularly of kind of child abuse, you wouldn't say that Darwinism is disproved just because kind of there are some people who treat their children better.
What Karl Popper complained about is that any example of Darwinism's predictions being false always have an ad hoc explanation. So they say, for example, that human beings, we should all of our sociological aspects of our behavior should be to help us survive and reproduce, which is why some Darwinian biologists and philosophers, they speak about how rape is a evolutionary mechanism for the losers who are trying to pass on their genes. Now, Others would say no, because the aim of the rapist is not to have children. The aim of the rapist is for his passion or whatever. Now the problem here is anything that contradicts a Darwinian explanation always has a malleable blanket that you can chuck on it and say, well, maybe this is an evolutionary byproduct, maybe this is an evolutionary byproduct. Like, for example, Richard Dawkins in his book The Selfish Gene, he says it is to a mother's benefit if her children are snatched away. Right? It's to a mother's benefit because she doesn't have to raise them and she can raise other children. Yet we know no mother wants her children to be taken away. But what the Darwinists do is they say this is an evolutionary byproduct.
Well, so I can address that one
Sure,
example, but
sure.
I'd prefer to go back to the child abuse example.
Sure.
So with that example, like kind of, it's a good behaviour for mothers to want to protect their kids because they don't know for sure that someone who does snatch their kids is going to look after their kids as well as they would. So
But say if they are going to. If they wrote a written agreement, I'm going to treat your child as a princess, I'm going to give them whatever you want. No mother wants her child to be taken away. Even Richard Dawkins admits to this.
Well, actually, there is an example of kind of children or parents giving their children away in some circumstances if they think that the child will be well looked after, and maybe if they think, oh, this will help me look after my other children more from the resulting money or that sort of thing.
But can you tell me this? If Darwinism gives a prediction that all of these things that we're speaking about in terms of the mother-child relationship, this is all in terms of genes and survival value and the selfish gene idea, why don't the parents know this?
Why don't the parents know what?
The fact that their love for their children is only because of genetics.
Well, a creature doesn't need to understand itself or why it thinks a particular way.
Because what you're basically saying is you're making claims which are unnatural. There are mothers who adopt children which are not related to them, which don't carry their genes, yet sometimes take care of them better than their biological children. We have cases like that.
Yeah,
now, anybody with common sense would say that falsifies Darwinism, but in your case, you'll say it's just an evolutionary byproduct.
You would say it falsifies Darwinism if the overall trend in most of the human population was for parents to look after their non-blood children better than their blood children who actually carry their genes.
Look.
But actually, what has been found is that the model is satisfied because the rate of child abuse is far greater for non-blood children than blood children. And so, like, this is an example of how something could have been falsified, but it wasn't.
Okay, so let's do this. Rather than saying there's general and there's exceptions, let me give you a general rule which goes against Darwinism. Okay?
Okay.
Survival of the fittest. Go down the road, we have hospitals which are survival of the unfittest. And who pays for it? Me and you. We pay for it through our tax. The problem is, not only philosophers of science, atheist philosophers of science, atheist philosophers of biology, atheist evolutionary biologists like Masatoshi Nai, they've basically said this. There's no difference between looking at something and saying God did it and looking at something and saying natural selection did it. Because at the end of the day, you can't test either. And he's an atheist who doesn't believe in Darwinism. Because what you're doing is you're taking a mystery and you're giving it a label. But me and you both know that survival of the fittest does not apply to hospitals, and NHS is the biggest recruiter in this country, the 5th biggest in the world, paid for by me and you every single time we buy coffee. That's survival of the unfittest, which is a general principle which goes against Darwinism.
So the reason why it doesn't is, I think you could find an example which, if it were the general rule, would refute kind of this sort of survival of the fittest ideology. But the example of hospitals doesn't do that because it's a good behaviour for kind of humans to cooperate in times of in times where the resources aren't too scarce. So if you cooperate, generally there's greater prosperity for
But that's
people.
not selfish gene.
And so
You're speaking about group selection now,
that's yeah.
right? Look,
So-
when
so
we
you're
look when we're speaking about neo-Darwinism, if you want to say scrap selfish gene, let's go to group selection, which E.O. Wilson believed in, then that's fine. But then what you have to realize is that basically means the selfish gene idea, which has been promoted for the last couple of decades, is false.
No, it doesn't, because there has been a synthesis where you explain how, for example, eusocial Hymenoptera come about.
Are you speaking about multi-level selection?
I don't know exactly. I
Look,
can't remember this, but like
look,
there has
neo-Darwinism-
been kind of well-founded explanations. For
Okay,
example,
look, let me-
why drone bees kind of serve the hive, but
okay,
they don't.
Okay,
feed themselves.
that's actually something different. That's known as kin selection. That's different. Forget that.
Yeah. So, but like,
Let me just explain what's going on here. Modern synthesis, which was put together in the 1930s when we had genetics and we had classical Darwinism, this was based that natural selection works at a genetic level, right? Now, Richard Dawkins popularized this through the selfish gene idea, even though it wasn't his idea, it was from someone else prior to him. Now, fast forward the last couple of years, biologists have realized it doesn't hold. So some of them are proposing an alternative, which is known as group selection, which is what E.O. Wilson, another evolutionary biologist, believes in. Now, him and Richard Dawkins, they fought each other online, and the spat got very personal. You know, E.O. Wilson called Richard Dawkins a science journalist, said, "You're not even a scientist, right?" These two ideas contradict each other: group selection and selfish gene. And in terms of the selfish gene, it doesn't make sense in terms of hospitals. What you can't do is say that this key works, and since it doesn't work, let me use this key. Either you have to stick to selfish gene idea with classical neo-Darwinism, or you have to drop that and say it's been false, and then move on to group selection. You can't cherry pick.
No. I believe that the work has been done to show that social behaviour can be evolved at a genetic level, and I'm not familiar with that kind of
that's known as sociobiology, right?
I'm not
Right.
sure.
That's a subfield in biology. The problem with that field is there are many philosophers of science and evolutionary biologists who are saying it's total nonsense.
I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Okay, so let me just give you an example. Philosopher of biology, his name is John Wilkins, he's an atheist. He researches this particular idea of where they try to explain human behavior in terms of the genetic value, survival and reproduction. And he critiques it. Likewise, David Stove, and we have even Dennis Noble from Oxford University. All these guys are atheists and they're evolutionary biologists and philosophers, and they say it doesn't make any sense. In fact, some of them call it unfalsifiable, some of it call it a religion, some of it call it that it's not even science.
Well, I don't know if that's what I'm advocating anyway, but like
if you're advocating neo-Darwinism, that's what you're advocating.
Well, I'm going to take a stab at it, even though I haven't read about this particular kind of genetic story. I'm not that familiar with it, but I know.
I would suggest you do your research before we speak about it, because what's going to happen is you're going to be not defending Darwinism. You're going to be defending something which is not even Darwinism.
Well, tell me what the problem with this would be. So you have a population of some mammals, and what would they already have? They'd be mammals, so they'd already have sexual reproduction. So they'd already kind of try and seek out each other in order to mate.
Yeah.
And so there will already be a kind of a slight kind of competition, because even if you can mate with a female, that female might also eat all your food. So there's already going to be an incentive for this species of mammals to start developing. There's already kind of a biological incentive to develop a kind of behavioral protocol, for example. So if like a gene arises which has the effect, this gene has the behavioral effect that the animal isn't automatically aggressive to any similar mammal it sees. It, in fact, actually checks first whether it's a female or whether it's a male to decide whether it's going to be aggressive or not. So it decides whether the female is on heat or in season, whether you can breed with the female. That would decide. And based on that kind of very simple behavioral protocol, the fitness would increase, and that mammal would start passing on its genes. So like that and through kind of further development of these kind of behavioral protocols, that can lead and the broad behavioral protocol would end up being like kind of cooperate in situations where there's enough resources and it's kind of good, and then if there's not enough resources, like don't cooperate.
Okay, so what you've explained there is perfectly consistent with kin selection and reciprocal altruism, right? Both of these,
and also like just genetic
no,
development.
These are genetic theories.
Yeah.
Kin selection and reciprocal altruism, they're genetic theories based on the self gene. So in terms of what you've said so far, it makes perfect sense. But if one of those mammals decides to help a mammal which it is distantly related to, rather than helping something which is closely related to, it falls outside of the remit of kin selection, and it falls outside of the remit of reciprocal altruism, say because it doesn't benefit, then that, your example falls apart.
I'd agree that it would fall apart if in general the species behaved that way. If it was the general trend for the species to help kind of unrelated mammals over its kin, its children, its brothers, then I'd say, okay, this whole Darwinism thing, this whole kind of selfish gene, that's kind of, it's fallen out of favour. We've got really strong evidence against it. And I'd agree that would be strong evidence against it, but I don't think the hospital example is.
Well, the hospital example gives you the inverse situation to what you were speaking about before. Rather than it being an exception, the general becomes into the rule.
Yeah, because the general...
Sorry, the exception becomes into the rule, sorry. So where you have the